Hello, I'm Dane, and this is Dane Explains. The vast majority of Protestants don't believe in the idea of purgatory, usually saying it's not in the Bible, and the Catholics made it up so they could sell unneeded indulgences, or so priests could give themselves and their cronies a get-out-of-jail-free card. What reasons Catholics use to explain why they believe in purgatory wouldn't matter if purgatory was in the Bible. Then, even the Bible-only Christians would accept it. Well, is purgatory in the Bible? Let me explain. Before I get into whether purgatory is in the Bible or not, let's go over what purgatory isn't. Many people who don't believe in purgatory, actually, I bumped into many Catholics who think this as well. Anyway, many people who don't believe in purgatory think that purgatory is some kind of place that people get to go if they get indulgences to keep them out of hell. Well, the big issue with that idea is the indulgences don't get you out of hell. Indulgences are only a remediation of some or all of the consequences of venial sins and forgiven mortal sins. Venial sins are minor sins that don't separate you from God. And mortal sins are sins that do. However, after they are forgiven, they no longer separate you from God. Catholics believe there are still effects left on the souls from the sins they have committed, even after forgiveness. An indulgence is something that someone can do here on earth to remediate that. What happens if someone dies with forgiven but unremediated sins? Purgatory. Also, Catholics don't necessarily believe you spend time there, even if you go, since the Catholic Church doesn't actually have a teaching on how long you are there for, just what the function of the place is. The process might be instantaneous, or may not even make sense to think of it in the term of time. Anyway, so is there anything in the Bible that supports the idea of purgatory? Well, the one most often cited is in 2 Maccabees 12:39-46. What? You've never heard of that book? Well, that's because it's one of the books that's in the Catholic Bible, but not in the Protestant one. Anyway, it basically says that Judas Maccabeus collected tribute to be sent to the temple for the expiation of the sins of fallen soldiers. The idea being that if the soldiers were already dead, and they already met the particular judgment, why would you bother doing the reparation for the remission of their sins, since the decision was already made? So that must mean purgatory exists. I actually don't think this is a good passage to back up the idea of purgatory. I go over the reasoning in the video, so I won't rehash the whole thing here. Link in the description. I'll just touch on the upshot. The Jews, specifically the Pharisaic Jews before Jesus' salvation, believed in the resurrection, specifically the resurrection from Sheol, also known as limbo, where they believed all the souls of the dead went, including the damned and the saved. On a side note, something I forgot to mention in my other video is the idea that they believed all the souls go to Sheol is backed up by a passage in 1 Samuel 28:19, where King Saul conjures the prophet Samuel. Samuel tells him that Saul and his sons will be down here in Sheol with him the very next day. And you can assume that Samuel and Saul had very different final destinations here. So yeah, it's obvious they believed they were going to the very same place. So, since Jesus hadn't come yet, these dead soldiers still had a chance. So, are there passages in the Bible that support purgatory, especially in the New Testament? Well, an interesting passage is in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Paul gives an analogy of doing God's work as constructing a building. He says the work of each person will come to light because it will be revealed by a fire to test each work. People whose works survive are rewarded, and the others suffer a loss, but will be saved nonetheless. But only by passing through fire. Now, you could argue this is some earthly reward or fire and not a spiritual reward in fire. However, 2 paragraphs earlier in the same passage, Paul just said that he and Apollos will get their reward for being God's co-workers. It's pretty clear he isn't talking about anything earthly. I mean, that was Paul, right? I've heard people say he didn't really understand what was going on. It was pretty clear he thought Jesus was coming back in his lifetime. So, are there places in the Bible where Jesus says things that support purgatory as well? Well, one place is in the Beatitudes, specifically the one on anger, where Jesus says you should reconcile with your opponents while you're on your way to the judge. Otherwise, you'll be thrown in prison. Jesus goes on to say you will not be given freedom until you have paid every last penny of your debt. That last line is referring to what happens to you after death, especially since Jesus ends the Beatitudes before and after the one on anger with a clear reference to what happens to a sinner after death. So reconciling with your opponents on the way to judgment is referring to forgiving people here on earth before our heavenly judgment. The only way you could pay down debt after death is if there was some place to do that. Another passage which elaborates on this is the parable of the unmerciful servant in Matthew 18, where a servant owed the king a great debt, and the king forgave him the debt. However, the servant was wicked and wouldn't do the same for someone who owed him a much smaller debt. The king got very angry when he heard about it and restored the debt of the wicked servant and handed him over to the torturers until the entire debt was paid. Jesus starts the parable specifically stating the story is referring to the kingdom of heaven. So you can't take the position that he's talking about what will happen to people here on earth while they're still alive if they don't forgive, backed up by the fact that many people escape through life without forgiving virtually anyone and don't seem to suffer any consequences in this life. Also, Jesus isn't referring to hell here either, since the wicked servant is being made to repay his debt. The king isn't putting him in prison and throwing away the key as if he was sending him to hell, stating this is a story about judgment in God when you don't forgive others. It results in the wicked servant being forced to repay his debt after already being forgiven. We all know there is no repayment from debt in hell. So the strongest passages that support purgatory don't come from some obscure Catholic-only Old Testament books in the Bible, but the Gospels from the mouth of Jesus himself. If you like this video, please press the like button, subscribe to my channel, and ding the bell to get notified when I post new videos. Also, please support me on Patreon, link in the description. The more people support me, the more time I can dedicate to making videos like this one. So, until next time, have a great week.